First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this. I think this is a very important topic, and it's one that I've been intimately connected with throughout my entire career. And I want to start, I'm a big defender of interdisciplinarity, but my view about it is, in a sense, one has to think about what the point of interdisciplinarity is. And I noticed that, at least with the next speaker, there's going to be some reference to the history of how knowledge has developed and so forth. And I think that this is kind of part of the horizon that one should have when thinking about the point of interdisciplinarity. Because I think very often we start with the assumption that we're forced into interdisciplinarity because everybody works in very specialized fields, and then at some point you have to think about, well, what does it all add up to? Right? We're all, in a sense, we're trained as specialists, and then if we want to think about anything broader, especially at the level of social or cultural problems, that then we have to sort of combine our expertises. Now, the point I want to raise with you at the outset is that this is a very incorrect way of looking at the history. That in a sense, I think the best way to look at interdisciplinarity, especially as something that is more than just a fashion and a buzzword, is as in a sense, trying to recover a lost unity of knowledge. Right? So in other words, in the beginning, you might say, knowledge was unified, and then it became specialized. And interdisciplinarity, if we want to understand it as an intellectual project that goes beyond just whatever the funding possibilities are today, is in a sense an attempt to recover the lost unity. Okay, and I want to put that right on the table at the outset, because I think there's a sense in which we have conferences like this because there are, as it were, opportunities available to become interdisciplinary. But if we were left to our own devices, we would just sort of specialize in our own fields. But now that we're forced to sort of deal with a kind of bigger world out there, as a result, we need to sort of take into account how we can make ourselves more relevant to other fields so we can collaborate with them. Now, I have nothing against that, but the point is that there is an intellectual issue here, too. There's not just a strategic issue. And that's the thing I want to put on the table to you. Now, it seems to me that at an intellectual level, there are two fundamentally different ways in which we might think about interdisciplinarity. The first view, and the two views, by the way, were present at the founding of the university as an institution. So we're talking about in the 13th century. And here I want to focus your attention on the difference between the master's degree and the doctorate degree in the original medieval university. And the different sorts of conceptions of how knowledge is divided up and unified between these two degrees. Some of you may be familiar with the history of philosophy, and in a way the history of philosophy is kind of the red trace that one would follow through to sort of understand this issue in a deep way. And you look at the medieval scholastic philosophers. And one of the interesting things about these guys is you look at what degree did these people have. Some are masters and some are doctors. Okay? And you know that the universities, the people who were the academic staff of the original universities, were typically members of either the Dominican or the Franciscan orders of the church. And the Franciscans tended to be masters. So we think about John Duns Scotus, for example, William of Ockham, are sort of the great Franciscan masters of the 13th century, 14th century. On the Dominican side, we have the doctors. Thomas Aquinas, Albertus Magnus, sort of standing out in that regard. Now, what's the difference here? Okay, so there are two different images of how knowledge is organized. And this has implications for where interdisciplinarity might happen. Because, of course, the medieval universities, in a sense, had disciplines. Right? And we have logic and rhetoric and grammar, music and astronomy, and, you have all these different fields. So there are fields already there. But the question is, how are they to be organized? Now, the masters basically thought that the idea was that each individual integrates all the disciplines. And when we think about a liberal arts education, as we still do today, right? The idea here is, right, the student learns many different things, and as it were, the interdisciplinarity, the integration, occurs within the individual. And that's, in fact, the empowering moment. That's when they become, in fact, a human being, as opposed to just Homo sapiens, biological creature, right? You become a full-fledged human being, in a sense. It's kind of like a finishing school, you might say. So you pick up all of these different disciplines, you integrate them within your being, and then this becomes the source of your self-empowerment in the future. And so the idea of liberal and liberal arts, right, is that you are free, you're not working as a laborer, and you are able to express yourself and identify yourself and stand on your own 2 feet by virtue of the way in which you integrate all those different disciplines in yourself. Okay? And just so liberal arts undergraduate education still has this kind of conception. And this is a conception that carries forward, and when we think about, for example, the German idea of Bildung, personal development, right, maturation, you think about someone in the early 19th century like Goethe, who in a sense was a master of all things, and that mastery of all these many different fields gave him his individuality. So in other words, the idea would be the integration of all these different disciplines in the person would be unique from person to person. And it's the uniqueness of the integration that marks you as an individual. Okay? And so interdisciplinarity in that sense is part of just personal growth to become a distinct person. And when you have the invention of the modern university, Humboldt and the German university system in the beginning of the 19th century, right, you get philosophy understood as sort of the master discipline for the integration. So it becomes kind of, as it were, the foundation subject. Right, so, and you have to, and what philosophy does is it provides you a roadmap for how to integrate the subjects that you're going to then learn. So philosophy is this kind of ultimately synthetic discipline. And what that does is, right, it gives you a sense of what it means to synthesize the different fields in yourself. And that then gives you some sort of direction and purpose in life. Now see, all of this interdisciplinarity that I'm talking about here, which I think in a way we would nowadays associate primarily with a kind of liberal arts undergraduate education, is occurring entirely within the person.